Music for the Synagogue is the topic which I have selected to discuss with you this morning as part of the Jewish Music Month program. I will confine my remarks to a traditional conservative synagogue in North America today, such as Beth Tzedek. In other words, I will be talking about a synagogue in which there is no instrumental accompaniment during religious services, other than at weddings, of course, and where the regular traditional text and order of the prayers is generally followed. Needless to say, I will not be dealing with the musical format of the Sephardi-type synagogue, which is totally different. In a nutshell, I will be talking about the individual and collective roles of the chazan, the choir, and the congregation insofar as the music of the service is concerned. I will deal with these roles as they were in the past, as they are now, and as they are developing into the future. The synagogue, as a place of congregational prayer and public instruction, had come into existence long before the destruction of the Second Temple and the cessation of the sacrificial worship. It is generally assumed that the synagogue had its beginning during the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century before the Common Era, when the Jewish people were separated from their temple and its centralized sacrificial system, and was brought to Judea after the restoration of Zion and the rebuilding of the temple. It has been estimated that approximately 4 million Jews of the diaspora had more than 1,000 synagogues by the time the Second Temple was destroyed in the year 70. Prayer is the natural expression of the religious feelings of man or women. That was for certain people who will know. Women have these feelings as well. It's hard to believe, but they do. In the Jewish tradition, prayer occupies a central position. The Jewish prayers are, for the most part, in the first person plural, because the Jewish people have always been intensely group conscious, primarily designed for congregational worship. The Hebrew liturgy was well established in the period immediately following the destruction of the Second Temple. Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple contains all the 4 elements of Hebrew prayers: thanksgiving, praise, confession, and intercession. Down to the last days of the First Temple, there were no formally prescribed prayers, not even a general command to pray. The Psalms stand out unique among the prayers of the entire world by their simplicity and their power and their majestic diction. They were widely in use during the period of the Second Temple. They are the songs of the human soul, timeless and universal. The development of congregational worship is a distinct contribution of Judaism to the other faiths that sprang from it. The public reading of the Torah was introduced by Ezra the scribe. After the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70, the synagogue became the only center uniting the Jewish people throughout the diaspora. From this time onward, the sages endeavored to establish uniformity of services. During the period of the Second Temple, the vocal musical elements of the service were in the hands of the Levites, who sang the Psalms and portions of the Torah. Originally, the Jews chanted the Torah using the Ta'amei HaMikra, also known as the cantillations or the trop. The word trop, incidentally, comes from the Greek word tropos, which means manner or mode. The trop is used as a means of musical interpretation of the text. Each trop represents not one tone alone, as music of today does, but rather a group of notes, or as we call it in musical terms, a musical motif. When we connect the motifs, we create what is called a mode. The cantillation used for the Torah is well known to us at Beth Tzedek. When we come to the Shema during the service, we chant the first paragraph with traditional cantillations. As you all know, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha. We do that according to the traditional chant used, or the traditional trop used for the Torah reading. When the Haftorah, the weekly reading from the prophets, is chanted on Shabbat, usually by a bar or bat mitzvah, the melody of the prophetic cantillations is used. That's a different melody, and the trop is the same. In other words, the signs are the same, but the melody or the modes are different. For example, when we chant the bracha before the Haftorah, we use the Haftorah cantillation mode. Baruch atah Adoshem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bachar min v'yeim toviv. It's a different chant. The bracha before the Haftarah is chanted like that, and therefore the whole Haftarah portion is chanted in the same trop. The melody of the cantillations used for chanting the Torah portions on the high holidays is different to the Shabbat melody used. It's important to note that. And therefore even the bracha, when we chant the bracha, if we get an aliyah and we chant the bracha before the Torah portion is read during the year, we say, Baruch hu et Adoshem ha'mevorach, Baruch Adoshem ha'mevorach yolam va'ed. When we do that on the high holidays, because there is a different chant, a different melodic mode for the cantillation used for the Torah chant, we also recite the brachot differently. In fact, I've made an offer many years since I've been here that if anyone is given an aliyah for the high holidays, he is welcome to come and see me, and I will show him how the brachot should be chanted before the aliyah. And it goes like this. Baruch hu et Adoshem ha'mevorach, Baruch Adoshem ha'mevorach li'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adoshem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato, Baruch atah Adoshem notein ha'torah. It creates the mood that is used or that is created by the trop used for the Torah on the high holidays. Also, the melodies for the cantillations used for the Megillot are different. We don't read all the Megillot at Bet Tzedek, but for example, we do read the Megillah of Eicha, Lamentations, which is chanted on Tisha B'Av. And the melody is, I'm not thinking of the words now, just the melody. Da 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 di da da la la di da 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 di da da di da da da. That's how Eicha is chanted. But the cantillations are of the melody, or the cantillation melody used for the book of Esther, which is chanted on Purim, is different. And there is one more cantillation melody that is used for Shir Hashirim, which is the Song of Songs, should be chanted on Pesach, Ruth, which is chanted on Shavuot, it should be chanted on Shavuot, and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, which is chanted or should be chanted on Sukkot. It is not only by chanting from the Torah and prophets that Jews have come before God with rejoicing and singing. Come before him with rejoicing and singing. This was the slogan of the Jewish people before the destruction of the Second Temple. In the minor temples, namely the synagogues, in Israel and the diaspora, people gradually developed a style of public prayer, or more correct, of song and prayer. From these times onward, the Jewish people produced musical forms of prayer, of supplication, of complaint, and a dialogue with God. Jewish prayer is in essence song. In our daily prayers, in the Yishtabach, just before the Baruch Hu every day, we say that God himself chose music as the highest form of thanksgiving, as we proclaim, Barachot v'hodaot me'ata ve'ad olam, song and praise, thanksgiving and music, evermore. And we conclude with the bracha, Habocher b'shirei zimra, he who chooses song. The melodies of prayers were transmitted informally from generation to generation. In this manner, they were collated into a body called nusach. The term nusach, the plural in Aramaic, which is used more frequently than the Hebrew plural form, is nuschaot. The term nusach has two meanings. One, in regard to the prayer service itself, it signifies an established form of text. For example, the Nusach Ashkenaz or the Nusach Sepharad. It's very interesting. When I was on my trip to my concert tour of Eastern Europe recently in the summer, I was on the plane on the way to I can't remember, we were going to Geneva, and from Geneva to Helsinki, and from Helsinki to Leningrad. Anyway, I was on the plane going to Geneva, and there were some elderly, bearded, black clothed gentlemen who were sitting just behind me on the plane. And at a certain point in the afternoon, one of them tried to gather a group together to daven mincha. And as it happened on that particular occasion, I had yortzeit. I had davened at shul here at Bet Tzedek in the morning, and I had davened the evening before, and it was important for me to be able to say Kaddish at mincha. So a group of us gathered together, a number of these guys with the beards and the kapotas, and they were speaking in Yiddish, and we all got together at the back of the plane, and one of them asked if there's anyone who's a mechuyav. In other words, is anyone here who is obliged to daven? As you probably know, if you are an Avel or you're saying Kaddish or you have Yortzeit, then it is your obligation, if you are able to do so, to daven. And I said, yes, I have Yortzeit, and I would daven. And I started, as I would at Bet Tzedek, and I finished, and the guy stopped me, and he said, are you an Ashkenazi Jew or a Sephardi Jew? I said, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. He was speaking to me in Yiddish. And he said, well, then you have to daven according to the Ashkenazi pronunciation of the words. Baruch Ato Adonai Shem Elokeinu. So I said, but what's one thing got to do with the other? This is the way I pronounce the Hebrew. God understands the Sephardi pronunciation and the Ashkenazi pronunciation. He says, we will not be Yotzei. In other words, those of us who daven with you, if you lead the service, would not be fulfilling our obligations to daven mincha if you, as an Ashkenazi Jew, daven using the Sephardi pronunciation of the words. And there was a whole argument about it, and some of my colleagues were saying, well, it's ridiculous, and then he says, well, I'm going to daven. He said, but why should you daven? You're not even a mechuyav. And while they were arguing, I started, Baruch Ato Adonai Shem Elokeinu. I had learnt that way of davening when I was a kid, but I had never done it, and I really, quite frankly, objected to doing it. But in any event, I did it that way, and everyone was quiet, and he actually apologized to me afterwards, but he said, this is the way it is, and then he took off his hat, and then his other kippah, and another kippah, and there were kippot for Africa there. Anyway, in the sense that I will use the term nusach here, I mean the basic underlying melodic theme or musical pattern which permeates the chanting of the text of our prayers. In other words, you know, those of you, as I start demonstrating it to you, you will see that you understand what I mean, that there are certain melodic patterns, certain musical sounds that you hear throughout the services. And the chanting of the prayers in accordance with the accepted melodic themes, in other words, with the accepted nuschaot, is in accordance with tradition. But in some cases, we regard chanting the services according to the correct nusach not only as traditional, but obligatory. For example, if you take the text of the end of the first paragraph of the evening service after the Baruch Hu. You know, the Baruch Hu et Adoshem Amorach, there are different melodic patterns for that depending on when the service takes place. For example, in the evening, just after the Baruch Hu, you say, Umavir Yom, Umevi Laila, Mavdil Ben Yom Uve Laila, Adoshem Tzavaot Shemo, El Chai V'Kayam Tamadim Nochaleinu Leolam Va'ed, Baruch Ata Hashem Hama'ari Varavim. Now let me illustrate to you the way the different nuschaot are used for the different services. For the weekday evening, that's the way the evening weekday service should be chanted. Friday evening is different. The same text, but it's a different nusach. It is a different melodic pattern. Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom ve'laila, Adoshem tzavaot shemo, El Echad
תמידים לא חלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה השם, המעריב ערבים.
Using the same text again. And by the way, this applies to the whole service. I'm just using one little example for you. For Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the same text, different nusach.
ומעביר יום, ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ולילה, עד השם צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה עד השם,
and so on. You hear? The text is the same, the nusach is different. And I see people, every time I speak about Jewish music and I deal with nusach, I see people shaking their heads. You know about these things, and somehow or another, you may not realize the significance of it insofar as Jewish tradition is concerned. One more illustration, and that is using the same text for the Shalosh Regalim, for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ולילה, עד השם צבאות שמו אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה עד השם, המעריב ערבים.
That is really an interesting demonstration of how the nuschaot are used throughout our prayers. Let's take some more, even more important, or not more important, but more interesting differences in a text that is very familiar to all of you, and that's the Kaddish. Everyone knows the Kaddish, but maybe everyone doesn't know the different nuschaot that are used traditionally for the Kaddish. For example, the regular Kaddish that we use, the Kaddish Titkabel, in other words, the full Kaddish goes,
יתגדל יתקדש שמי רבה, ביעלמד מרחילותי ביעמליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיים ישראל, והגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה,
and so on and so forth. The mourner's Kaddish, believe it or not, also has a nusach. It's not Yitgadal v'Yitkadash Mera. It's the way we chanted it here is almost the way it should be done, except it's a little bit too read as opposed to chanted. So it goes Yitgadal Yitkadash Meraba Bi'alma Divrachilutei Bi'amich Malchutei B'chayechon V'yomechon V'chayechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala V'zman Kariv Imru Amen. Can you see it has a chant? It's not quite reading it. The Friday evening service, the half Kaddish before the Amidah, has the same nusach which is used for the half Kaddish just before the Maftir on Shabbat morning. Yitgadal ve'yitkadash shemei rabba mi'alma divrach chilutei v'yamich malchutei v'chayichon v'yomechon u'v'chayi lechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv v'yimeru amen. And in North America, for some reason that I'll never understand, they switch for the Yehei Shmei Rabbah to the other Kaddish Nusach. They sing Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavarach, which is wrong. It shouldn't be like that. You're supposed to keep in the same Nusach. You sing Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavarach V'yalam Ulal Me'al Mayayit Barach. And then you're in the same nusach, Yitbarach v'yishtabach. And for some reason or another, when I came to North America, I couldn't understand why they went back to the other. But somebody probably did it, and everybody followed suit. Now, the half Kaddish, which is used for the weekday evening service, In other words, right at the end of the service, when you say, המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו יתגדל ויתקדש מרבה ויעלמה לברכינותי ויעמיק מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחי לכל בית ישראל ועגלה
izman kariv imeru. Amen.
That's the nusach that should be used at that point. Now, some interesting different nuschaot for the high holidays. For example, the half kaddish in the middle of the Musaf service, just before the Musaf service, just before the repetition of just before the Amidah on the high holy days, has a very interesting nusach.
Yid gadal v'yid kadash me'raba mi'alamad yivarach ilyotei mi'amlich malchutei v'chayechonu v'yomechon,
And so on and so forth. The half kaddish that is used for the evening service on the high holidays has a different nusach from everything that we've done so far. It takes me a second or two to get into that because each one is very different.
It goes Yid Gadol, Yid Gadol, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alamad Yivrachilotei, Ve'yamelich Malchutei, Ve'chayechon, Ve'yomechon.
You can see it's the nusach of the high holiday service, evening prayers. Now Ne'ilah, the end of the Yom Kippur service, just before the Chazan begins or just as he begins the Ne'ilah service, it's the Ashrei, and after that we come to the Kaddish. It goes Yid Gadol, Yid Kadosh, Shemei Rabbah, Me'alamad Yivarach Yilutei, Ve'yamlich Malchutei, Ve'chayechon, Ve'yomechon, and so on. Here's an interesting one. The half kaddish that's used before the Musaf service when the prayer for Tal, for dew, is recited on Pesach, and when the prayer for Geshem is recited on Shmini Atzeret. It is very similar to the kaddish for the Ne'ilah service. In fact, in days gone by, when many of the Balabatim knew Nusach almost as well as the Chazan himself, when a Chazan came for a proba, when a Chazan came for an interview, looking for a job, an audition, the Balabatim would question him, not only where he was born or what he did, but what sort of Nusach he knows. And they would often ask him the question, demonstrate the difference between the half Kaddish for Ne'ilah, which is the one I just chanted for you, and the half Kaddish used for Tal and Geshem, dew and rain. And that goes like this.
Yid Gadol, V'yid Kadosh, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'yalamad Yivrach Yilutei, Ve'yamlich Malchutei, Ve'chayechon, Uve'yomechon, and so on. Just one more example of the Kaddish, and we've done quite a number of them. One more example of the Nusach used for the Kaddish is at the Mincha service on a Shabbat afternoon. Of all the Nuschaot that I know, and I presumably know most of them, if not all of them, my favorite is the Nusach for the Shabbat afternoon, the Mincha service. And it's really very beautiful. And it goes, Yid Gadol, V'yid Kadash, Shemei Rabbah. You see, the whole service is like that. Ata echad, v'shimcha echad, umiki amecha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. So the Kaddish is in the same nusach. Yid Gadol, V'yid Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'yalmad Yivrach Yilutei, V'yamlich Malchutei, V'chayechon, U'v'yomechon, U'v'chayei l'chol Beit Yisrael, V'agalav izman kariv imeru. Amen. I find it a very beautiful, haunting type of nusach. The Kabbalat Shabbat, the evening service for Friday evening has its own nusach.
The daily services have their own nuschaot. The Shabbat and the festival services have their own nuschaot. For those of you who want to improve your basic knowledge of how to chant services, a number of years ago, did a series of cassettes, which is available in the Sisterhood book, at least gift shop. And this is for you to learn how to do the weekly the services and the Shabbat services. We have on those tapes the simple nuschaot, the simple chanting of all the prayers for the weekday. That's the morning, the afternoon, and the evening services, as well as the Hallel service. In addition to that, we have the Friday evening service from beginning to end, and the Shabbat morning service from the beginning right to Adon Olam at the end, simply for learning. It's very simply done, and I've done that a number of years. I know a lot of people have used those tapes, so if any of you want to improve your knowledge of the chanting of the services, why don't you go ahead and get those. I really hope that you have a good idea now of what I mean by nusach. Some nuschaot are regarded as skarbova tunes or misinai tunes. In other words, they are so important to our tradition that they are regarded as if they were handed down to us from Mount Sinai. That is why they're called misinai, from Sinai, nusach. For example, and there are many of these. For example, the melody used for Aleinu on the high holidays, which is not Aleinu l'shabech l'Adon HaKol. That's something that somebody made up. It's not nusach. It's just a melody. There's nothing wrong with it. It just happens to be a melody. But the melody that we chant, we use for chanting the Aleinu on the high holidays is nusach misinai, from Sinai. It doesn't mean that God actually chanted the Aleinu like this. It means that's how authentically we regard it. And it goes, Aleinu l'shabech l'Adon HaKol. You hear that melody? La da dee da 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 da. Remember that, because you'll hear it in other places as well. And then also in the Avodah service, the service where we deal with how the priests used to come in. The high priest would come into the temple on the high holy days, and they would chant certain portions of the service, and he would lead them. And it's called Vehakohanim, and the nusach for that is also regarded as nusach misinai. Vehakohanim and so on and so forth. Also the melody for Kol Nidre. I wrote an article a number of years ago that was actually published in the Canadian Jewish News regarding the Kol Nidre, and more particularly the significance of the melody of Kol Nidre rather than the words. The words are really a mishmash of tenses that are mixed. We're not sure whether we mean past tense or future tense, and it's really, the words themselves are not that significant. The melody is significant. And the melody is regarded as nusach misinai. We really don't know where it comes from. Some people say it may have come from the time of the Spanish Inquisition. We really don't know. But all we know is that if any chazan, and I believe that there are chazonim, I happen to know one chazan who composed another melody for Kol Nidre, and he was nearly murdered trying it on Yom Kippur. Because no matter who you are or what you are, if you are a Ashkenazi Jew, you want to hear Kol Nidre v'sarei u'shavua v'charomeh v'konomeh v'chinoyeh. That's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear any melody that somebody else composed. Whatever music is used in the shul must, in accordance with our tradition, be based on the correct nusach for the service during which the melody is used. We must not take a familiar secular or even popular Israeli melody and adapt it to the synagogue service just because it fits. I believe that it is wrong. I speak against it. I write against it. I am a proponent of the tradition that is used, the traditional melodies that are used for our synagogue worship. Synagogue music is not secular, and even though both forms must have and to some extent will continue to influence each other, they should be kept apart. I cannot bear to hear Adon Olam sung to melodies such as Yankee Doodle. Ever heard Adon Olam? You know what Adon Olam means? Have you ever thought about it? Adon Olam Asher Malach, master of the universe who ruled before anything was created. He ruled the world before anything was created, to the tune of Yankee Doodle. Adon Olam Hashem Malach B'terem Kol Yetzin Nivra Le'et Nasa V'chevzo Kol Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra. People do it. Chazonim do it. To me, it is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace to do that. How about Scarborough Fair? I heard some very orthodox chazonim. Have you ever sung Adon Olam to Scarborough Fair? It fits. It's beautiful. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra. It's beautiful, it really is. But it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's pathetic. And if I want my job to end immediately and very abruptly, when it comes to Christmas, I can sing Adon Olam to Adon Olam Asher Malach. It's beautiful, fits really beautifully. But that's all I need. Members of the executive are looking at me and they're saying, yeah, just try that, kiddo. Anyway, I have a lot of problems with using the beautiful, holy text of our prayers to some cheap little ditty. Even the Kedusha on Shabbat, when we sanctify God's name, Na'aritzcha v'nagdishcha, Kadosh, 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 holy are you. And we say, Hu Eloheinu, He is our God, He is our King, He is our Master, and so on and so forth. In many synagogues, and the cantors are responsible because the cantors are the ones who introduce the melodies and get rid of those that shouldn't be there. They introduce Erev Shel Shoshanim to the words of Shema Yisrael, Hu Eloheinu. Erev Shel Shoshanim is a beautiful Hebrew song. It's a love song, a romantic song about an evening of roses. And for that reason, it's become almost misinai at weddings in North America. Another thing I don't understand, why no wedding can take place without Erev Shel Shoshanim, Netzena El Habustan. Every bride has to walk down to that. Why? South Africa and England and Europe, they walk down to Baruch haba, blessed be those who come in the name of the Lord. Baruch haba, B'Shem Adonai. Why should it be evening of roses? It can be romantic after the service. Service is Kedusha. And they take Erev Shel Shoshanim, some of the Chazonim, right in Toronto as well, and they sing, Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshiach. It's beautiful, it really is. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't fit. That's not how you deal with God. Not at all. And why do they use these melodies? Because they say this is what the people know and this is what the people want, and it's easy for the people to participate. And one of my colleagues, who's a very, very dear friend of mine, and I say it publicly because he and I disagree publicly on it, my friend Harold Klein of the Shara Shamayim has published a book on exactly this issue, using popular Israeli, Hasidic, and secular melodies for the davening, and he has no problems with it, and I have a lot of problems. It doesn't mean that I'm right, it means that he's wrong. I really believe, when I first came to Beit Tzedek, I had a lot of problems. A lot of people said to me, but why are you changing the melodies all the time? We used to sing the Na'aritzcha v'nagdishcha. Why does it always have to be sung like that? There are so many beautiful melodies. There are so many beautiful nuschaot that are traditional. My attitude is, let the people complain, but in time they will learn. And I really believe that in the 10 years that I have been here, people have learned. They know that there are different melodies. There are different nuschaot that are used, and they have come to accept that, because I really very, very rarely get a complaint anymore about you changing the melodies. We never know what you're doing. On the contrary, I have people who are having bar mitzvahs coming up or special celebrations who come to me and say, I'd really like to discuss the service with you because I particularly like this melody that you use for Yismachu and that melody that you use for the Kedusha and so on. And when I tell this to my colleagues, they say, aren't you insulted when your congregation has the audacity to come up and tell you what they want you to sing? I say, no, I'm proud of that. I'm proud that they know that there are different melodies and each person is entitled to have his own taste regarding which melody he would like me to use, and I have no problem with that at all. You know, one of the questions that may be asked is, if we have to base everything on traditional nusach, how do we introduce new melodies into the service? How do you get new melodies? And the answer is that the new melodies are still rooted in the nusach. Give you an example. You take Yismachu for Shabbat morning. The Shabbat morning service, the Musaf portion of the Shabbat morning service, as well as other parts, but I'll just deal with the Musaf service, is chanted according to a nusach. Now you know what that means, a melodic pattern, which is called the nusach avaraba, or the Phragish mode. It doesn't matter if you remember that or you don't remember it. It's just one of those things. That's what it's called. The nusach avaraba, or the mode which is known as Phragish. And the sound is da di da 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 di da da di da 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 di da 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 da. So you'll hear Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh haShabbat. Hashem Elokeinu Baruch atah Hashem da da di da 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 di da 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 da. That is the nusach. Now, if we want to create a new melody, we can develop that as long as we come back home. That means to that nusach. For example, take the Yismachu we often use in Shul. And Shabbat morning goes, Yismachu v'malechutecha, shomerei, shomerei Shabbat, shomerei Shabbat, v'kohei onek Shabbat, da-da-da. You hear how it comes back to the nusach. So, and then we go away again. We read a major, it's a completely come back home. So we keep to the tradition, we create new music built on the tradition. And there are many, many examples of those. So the music comes really from the chazan, but also it comes from the choir and from the congregation. Incidentally, the three letters of the word chazan have been interpreted as formulating the basic prerequisites of a chazan, besides his vocal expertise. The chet from the word chazan means a wise man, chacham in other words, a wise man versed in Torah. The Zayin means zaken, elderly, over 30 years of age. And the Nun, and here I have a bit of a problem at the moment, is nasui, means married. Chazan is supposed to be a wise man, versed in the Torah, and he is supposed to be over the age of 30, and he's also supposed to be married. It also stands, the Chet Zayinun also stands for the Yiddish Chazonim Zayin Naroim. Chazonim are fools. The Chazan sings what is known as the cantorial recitative. The cantorial recitative. A recitative is a term applied to the cantor's free chant of the prayers, emphasizing in song the meaning of the prayers, based on the correct nusach and the natural inflections of speech. A cantorial piece, as it were, should not be viewed as a concert performance, but rather as an artistic, vocal, and musical interpretation of the prayer concerned, chanted by one trained to use his voice to beautify our prayers by the embellishment of our traditional musical patterns, the nuschaot, thereby strengthening our communication with God and so glorifying his name. The cantorial recitative has always been and must, I believe, continue to be an integral part of our service. And classes should be held where the chazan illustrates just how the cantorial recitative enhances and emphasizes the meaning of the prayers. One of the problems with the cantorial recitative today is that people do not understand the meaning of the words, and therefore, if the chazan is chanting away and crying or praising, depending on what he's doing at a particular time, the people are not following what he's doing, and that is a big problem. It's important for people to understand. And maybe the time has come for the chazan to stand up in shul, maybe from time to time, once in a while, and explain these kinds of things, what we mean by nusach, what we mean by tradition, and what we mean by cantorial recitative, and the place that the recitative has in the musical format of our traditional synagogue. But congregational participation is also essential, and the melodies must be carefully selected, as I've indicated. Congregational singing cannot take the place of a well-trained choir of professional singers. The huge choruses that participated in the services during the existence of the first and second temples at Jerusalem, and about which we read in the Talmud, as well as the revival of large synagogue choirs at the beginning of the 19th century, reveal the importance of choral singing at services. In temple worship, the Levite choir consisted of a minimum of 12 adult male singers who were admitted to the choir at the age of 30 after having trained for 5 years. After the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, the Levite choir ceased to function, and the rabbis decreed that both vocal and instrumental music be banned as a sign of national mourning. Subsequently, this regulation was modified when Maimonides permitted the choir to sing at synagogue services. Instrumental music has continued to be forbidden, and choirs sing a cappella without accompaniment, that is, at traditional synagogues. In the 17th century, Solomon Rossi organized a choir that sang arrangements of psalms in 3 to 8 voices. It was really Solomon Zulzer of Vienna whose choral musical services met with real success, and he gave us a lasting legacy of exquisite choral music for the synagogue. For example, the Torah service, which we sing generally at Beth Tzedek, and is probably traditional in many synagogues the world over, is the musical setting of Zulzer. You know, when you sing, Ad Hashem Melech, Ad Hashem Malach, Ad Hashem Yimelech Le'olam Eved. That's music of the Torah service by Solomon Zulzer. And those who followed Zulzer were Louis Lewandowski in Berlin, and Samuel Nomberg in Paris, Hirsch Weintraub in Königsberg, Israel Lazarus Mombach. Mombach, we also use some of all of these composers, by the way. Lewandowski's music is used very frequently in our services, as is Mombach, when we sing that was written by Israel Mombach. And in London, David Novakovsky was from Odessa. Recently I sang at a concert in Odessa. It was a wonderful experience to know that where I sang, David Novakovsky was a great composer. In the United States, 4-part choral singing was introduced to the synagogue by Jacob Samuel Margovsky, who was known as Zeidel Rovner. When dealing with the cantorial recitative, I said that choral compositions must be used, but they should be of good taste and based on nusach, and must enhance the meaning of the prayers and strengthen the communication between the congregation and God. Congregational singing, likewise, is an indispensable ingredient of the synagogue service. There are those who are of the opinion that congregational singing is a relatively recent innovation, but in fact it is as old as synagogue worship itself. In the ancient temple of Jerusalem, we are told, as the Levites sang the major portions of the service, the congregation responded by singing Amen, Hallelujah, and Kili Olam Chazdo. Unfortunately, in some synagogues, the melodies that have become known as traditional are in many instances based on popular secular songs, marches, and dances, something which I alluded to earlier in my talk. For example, it was not unusual for a cantor to adapt sacred prayers to operatic arias. For example, the aria from I Pescatori di Perle, the Pearl Fisher. It's a beautiful. It's a beautiful. And the Chazonim sing, Ki lekach tov natati lachem. right in front of the ark. I have a lot of problems with that. I have problems with using the precise melody, but there's nothing wrong with using melodies that perhaps stem from the opera. For example, Lewandowski, in his famous Hallelujah, must have been influenced by the opera. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. It's so operatic, it must be, but we don't know exactly where he took it from. So if it was influenced by opera, I have no problems. If it was stolen from opera directly, I have a lot of problems with that. The deterioration of congregational melodies was caused by the thoughtless introduction of hit tunes from the Yiddish theaters, and that's really important to note that in North America. Many of these tunes became traditional, so to speak. I must stress that it is the responsibility of the chazan and choir director of each synagogue to discourage the use of these borrowed, secular, and inept musical elements during religious services, no matter whose tastes they happen to satisfy. I'm pleased to inform you that today the musical tastes of congregants are constantly improving, and they expect to hear and to sing good music in the synagogue. What type of melodies, then, should be used for congregational participation? Before answering this question, let us define the term traditional, good and bad. In Judaism, the word traditional has a connotation of being part of an unwritten code said to have been revealed to Moses at Mount Sinai and then handed down to us through generations. If we accept this definition, then it becomes apparent that many of the melodies that we, our parents, and possibly our grandparents have been singing are most assuredly not traditional. For example, the traditional Ma'os Tzur for Hanukkah, Ma'osor Yeshuati Lechana El Shabeach, and so on, is really a Lutheran church hymn, directly taken and adapted to Ma'os Tzur. And we think that that's the Nusach, that's what we're supposed to do. What about the so-called traditional Ein Keloheinu? Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kamoshienu. If it's sung the way it should be, then you'll see where it comes from. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kamoshienu. It's a German march. That's where it comes from. The beer hall. The Germans used to sing these songs in the beer halls of Germany. And some German chazan chapped that and he sang it to Ein Keloheinu, and we regard it as traditional. By the word good, I mean pleasant and agreeable and befitting. And the reverse would apply to the definition of bad. The generally accepted congregational melody on Shabbat morning for the Ritzei V'Nuchatenu absolutely distorts the correct pronunciation of the text. And I have a problem with that. Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha v'ten chelkenu b'toratecha sabeinu mituvecha v'samchenu b'shuatecha. The words are distorted. You have to try and adapt. Sometimes we take poetic licenses when we compose, but you should try to make sure that the words are properly used. Conferences and conventions are held about the problems of inferior congregational melodies, and the Cantors Assembly has published a number of works on the use of congregational melodies in the services. Incidentally, there is a convention of the traditional cantors from throughout the world, which will take place in Toronto from the 5th to the 8th of May. And the public will be invited to attend the sessions of this convention. There will be cantors from all over the world. The so-called non-traditional convention of the Cantors Assembly will take place in Los Angeles, and the convention of the traditional cantors will take place in Toronto. Congregational melodies are often based on Hasidic melodies, and there's nothing wrong with using that at all. Hasidism, founded by the Baal Shem Tov in the 18th century, ascribed primary importance to music, and there's nothing wrong with using melodies and even adapting some of those melodies to our services. We should never attempt to revolutionize a service. New melodies should be introduced gradually and over a period of time, and there should be a harmonious blend of the old and the new. I believe that there should always be the familiar and traditional in the music of the service, but there should also be the new and the unfamiliar, for if there is no innovation, the service may become mechanical. There must be variety, change, and yes, even the unexpected. The musical portion of each service should allow sufficient time for the chazan to express his chazanic artistry and for the choir to sing its prepared musical compositions and for the congregation to participate throughout the service. As chazan of Beit Tzedek, I shall constantly strive to enlarge the repertoire of each essential musical element of our services so that we may continue to pray to God in song. Judaism is beginning to stir again, and we can expect a period of revival for the synagogue and its grand musical heritage. As Leib Glantz, one of the greatest chazonim of all times, a man with whom I was privileged to study at the Tel Aviv Cantorial Academy, put it this way. If one day there should emerge a Jewish symphony of a standard comparable with Beethoven and Bach outside the synagogue, it will surely be rooted in cantorial music. That symphony will be based on the ancient musical patterns, the nuschaot, created by our people. Thank you very much.
We'll take some questions at this time, if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
Like you mentioned about the Musa in Sinai. How is it compared to the Sephardic chant?
The Sephardi chant is largely based on the folk music of the particular area where the Sephardim live. In other words, it is directly taken from the music of the people. The Sephardi Jews who came from Spain would use Spanish melodies, the folk melodies of Spain. And those who came from North Africa, from Morocco, or from some of the Middle East countries, use the melodic, not even the melodic patterns, because some of their nuschaot are based on ours as well, but largely used are the folk melodies of the particular area. So you can't really talk about Sephardi nusach in the same way as you can talk about Ashkenazi nusach, because I come from South Africa and yet I can walk into a shul at Beit Tzedek and daven, or in England or in Israel or wherever I may daven, I can walk in and daven. Some of the melodies may be different, but the basic chant is the same, whereas the Sephardim is not the same. Go ahead.
As a Kowarsky, I do a lot of Birkat Hamazon. I'd like to find out if there's a different nusach for Shabbos and Yom Tov.
Now, the Birkat Hamazon is the melody that we use is not nusach. Okay, it is simply a melody, and so Baruch Atah is really there's no nusach at all. By the way, there are many prayers such as that, which are not governed by nusach. I mean, Adon Olam doesn't have a nusach. Ein Kolahenu doesn't have a nusach. You can create whatever melody you like, provided, as far as I'm concerned, the melody embellishes and enhances and beautifies the meaning of the text. But the benching does not have a nusach. Yeah.
I've never heard Shir
We don't do it, and we never. Where's the rabbi? Aunt Rabbani Maraja. We don't do the Shir Hashim. In fact, I have never heard it chanted either, because it's just generally not done. It's a great pity. I sing songs from the Shir Hashirim, but I don't. I've never heard it chanted. Certainly not in North America. And as a kid, I heard it in South Africa. It's a great pity because we lose that. We lose that part of our tradition. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, Cantor, I have a couple of questions. I'd like to say first, I enjoyed your sermon very, very much. I'm sure
Thank you.
everybody. I found it very fascinating. Perhaps more descriptive where we'd be able to mesmerize what we were saying.
Thank you.
The two questions are, in your Shabbos service, at the end of Musaf, towards the end of Musaf, when the reader says it chants the full Kaddish, there are occasions when you use almost a martial march. How do you square that with what you've been saying we should stick to the Musaf of that? The second question is, I think it's fair to say that 90% of the congregation, our congregation, do not understand the Hebrew, yet they
Let me take the questions in the order in which you asked them. The Kaddish Titkabel, the full Kaddish at the end of the Amida, is generally chanted in a major. It's, if you don't understand, if you don't know music, it doesn't really matter. It's done in a major. Okay? Now, it is not, although it's traditional to chant it in a major, it doesn't necessarily have to be done exactly like that. And it can be chanted according to a melody which is in the same sort of vein as that. It's a happy, melodic Kaddish at the end, chanting magnified and sanctified is God's name. So what I do at Bet Tzedek is use a Kaddish that was adapted from a Hasidic melody by a very famous chazan called Todros Greenberg. And he sang Yid Kada Shemei Rabba Amen V'Yalma Da Da Da. See, he took a Hasidic melody and he adapted it to a Kaddish that is not governed to the same extent by Nusach as some of the Skarbova, some of the Misinai Nuschaot are govern the Kaddishim. For example, you could never do that for the Kaddish before Ne'ilah, or the Kaddish for Tal and Geshem, or the Kaddish before the Musaf service on the high holidays. You couldn't do that because there we are really governed by the Nusach. To some extent, the services are governed by Nuschaot, which can, on occasion, be altered, and that Kaddish is one of them. That's why I use a different chant there. I sometimes use a different melody even for the half Kaddish before the Musaf on Shabbat, but I would never do that on the high holidays. Your second question is a very good question. Now, I think that your question was, if people don't understand the meaning of the words, how is it that they enjoy the service, they participate in the service, they are moved by the service and feel fulfilled when they leave the service? I think that's sort of paraphrasing your question. It's a very good question, and I can answer it by indicating that one of the biggest compliments I ever get from people after services come from people who are not Jewish, who come to a service and say, Cantor, I was at the service, I didn't understand a word, and yet I was moved by the mood created, by the music created, by the melodies that were sung, by the way that they were sung, by the chants that were used to pray. So that how much more so should our Jewish members of the congregation be moved when the correct Nuschaot are sung, when they are participating, and when they are being moved by the mood created by the music. And to me, if I'm able to do that through the music, then I am fulfilling one of the most important roles that I play as the Chazan, to create a mood that will move the people while they pray, even though they may not understand the meaning of the words. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Anyone else? That's it. Thank you very much.
Before I call on Earl Leposki to thank our speaker, I'd just like to mention that all of Cantor Kowarsky's tapes, as well as other tapes and records of Jewish music, are available in our Sisterhood gift shop. Now I'd like to call on Earl Leposki, Chairman of the Men's Club Board, to thank our speaker.
Thanks. Cantor, it's always a pleasure to listen to you, and this morning in particular, I think we all learned a great deal, especially that we all found out that you are over 30. And never. And remember, I'm always younger. As far as Men's Club is concerned, we would like to thank you very, very much for coming out this morning and also for consenting to do our Devar Torah at our March board meeting. Just a little reminder. And how do you say thank you to a person of Cantor Kowarsky's stature after hearing him a few short weeks ago downstairs at the cantorial and being full of pride not only for our synagogue but for our Cantor? I think it's an impossible job, and really I'd just like you all to give him a warm round of applause.